Scott Walker is now raising money based on what he sees as dumb and intrusive questions from reporters, saying in a fundraising pitch that he wants to fight back against, quote, the clueless and mindless journalistic herd. Dustups involving the Wisconsin governor has sparked a broader debate about what he calls the gotcha game, such as being asked what he thinks about Rudy Giuliani saying President Obama doesn't love America.
There does seem to be a little bit of a double standard here. The Republicans tend to get asked these questions about their outliers more than Democrats are.
Fournier, you write in defense of gotcha questions. You even come out of the closet and say you are an admitted practitioner of gotcha questions.
I'm
Why?
out of the closet. Thank you, Howard. Yeah, there shouldn't be a double standard, but there certainly has got to be plenty of room for gotcha questions. As an interviewer, most of my questions that I've asked Democrats and Republicans have been trying to elicit information or context, but there are times when I'm trying to test them. And this goes back, I learned this covering Bill Clinton in Arkansas. There's a man who can't suffer fools. If I wanted to have him on his heels, if I wanted to have control of an interview, which is my job, if I wanted to test him a little bit, I'd ask the dumbest question I could.
You do it deliberately.
Deliberately, you betcha, you betcha. Now, I think there are gotcha answers, and I think there is gotcha coverage, and we can talk about that if you want, but there's nothing wrong with a gotcha question.
Let me get Mary Catherine in. So are journalists asking Republicans in particular outrageous questions, or are candidates balking at, ordinary aggressive questions because they're not agile enough to finesse them?
Look, I do think there's a double standard here, and I'm going to do the unprecedented and agree with George Stephanopoulos. Part of the issue is
maybe he's agreeing with you.
They get asked these different sorts of questions, sometimes more aggressively, and then here's the big one. They're emblematic, and they have to be asked of every single other Republican. That almost never happens with Democrats, where the same question, oh, well, he messed up, so now we're going to ask 8 more of you about it. That just doesn't happen on the left, and that can be really problematic, as we saw with Walker. The other thing is, like I said,
it happening during the Iraq War debate about if you evolve like John Kerry. It happens on the left. Not as much, but it happens on the left.
Certainly not as much. The extent to which that Giuliani thing got blown out of proportion was crazy to me. But here's the other thing. There's a difference between not being agile and pushing back. Like I think Republican candidates need to be tough and recognize that this is hostile questioning, sometimes turn it around on the press. Walker has not done it perfectly, but I think he's making a step in the direction to make this a pattern, to point this out.
Do you agree that what I call these guilt by association questions, he said this, what do you think, that the GOP side gets peppered with those more?
I don't know if specifically with, I mean, I do think there's more of this. Everybody has to denounce. Todd Akin says something, and every Republican has to denounce it. Whereas Bill Maher says something and gives money to the president, and no Democrats have to denounce anything he says. So that does happen. I don't think the example, though, the Giuliani is a good example of that. I think that Scott Walker should have been able to answer that question. I mean, that's when somebody says something that incendiary, like accuses the president of not loving the country. I think that's a reasonable question to say. Like, do you believe that? I mean, to me, that doesn't actually strike me as a gotcha question. That's
and aren't adversarial questions, and I think we all agree that the standards should apply equally to both sides, aren't they sort of part of the presidential marathon? Don't we judge candidates by how they, every professional politician knows how to turn the question around, make a point, pivot it away, attack the press, but Walker just seemed to say, I'm not playing this game.
That's why I think there are gotcha answers. If Walker had said, of course he loves his country, but he's destroying it, it wouldn't have been a story. He made that a gotcha question with his gotcha answer. And I also think there's gotcha coverage. Again, using Walker, here's an example of where we did go too far with the answer. Question's fair, the way we covered it wasn't. This is when he said at CPAC, if I can take on 100,000 protesters, I can do the same across the world. A lot of reporters said, oh, he's comparing union members with ISIS. That's not what he was doing. That is a gotcha coverage. That is being unfair. What he was doing was comparing the challenge of fighting ISIS with the challenge of fighting unions, which was silly, sophomoric, but certainly not comparing ISIS with union members.
Right, and in those instances, we always know, the journalists know what he meant. Now, maybe it was expressed very poorly, but it gets blown up, as you say.
Well, some journalists acted like they didn't know what he meant. Some journalists literally said that he was comparing ISIS with union members. That's wrong. That's not what he was doing.
You agree with that?
Question was fair. Coverage was not.
I do agree with that. And to the point that about the patriotic question, the issue for conservatives is, well, the president calls us terrorists and suicide bombers and hostage takers, and nobody else gets asked if that is a legitimate line of rhetoric.
Yeah, but be better than the Democrats.
I take pride in it, frankly. But that's a problem.
Quick final word.
Yeah, look, I think there is a double standard. There's no question, but I do think there's some things that are reasonable. And if Giuliani said this at a Walker event, that's just a reasonable thing. If there was no connection between the two of them, then I would say, okay, that's a little. And I don't like all this. Everybody being forced to denounce. All right,
this part is a debate that will continue throughout this campaign and beyond. Ron Fournier, Kirsten Powers, Mary Catherine Ham. Thanks very much for stopping by this Sunday. Ahead, David Axelrod on just